tell you something. We don't have ethical oil in Canada. We have tar sands oil, which is like regular oil, but a whole lot dirtier. It ravages the earth as it is extracted, ravaging bodies, ravaging the land, and it also threatens the earth when it is transported in pipelines like the proposed Keystone XL pipeline. It threatens waterways, drinking supplies, ranches, the land that people and animals depend on. The vast majority of Canadians care deeply about climate change. They show it with their actions, but it doesn't matter because of the tar sands, because it undoes all of the actions that we do as individuals, because our national emissions are still up 30% from the time we signed the Kyoto Protocol, and all that time we've made a mockery of that agreement and a mockery of international law. So here's the other thing they're telling us. They're telling us that this will create jobs, and how dare we stand in the way of jobs during an economic crisis. We know that the same economic logic that puts greed above all and liberates corporations, that same economic model that is threatening to crash the global climate system is exactly what crashed the global economic system, which is why we don't have enough jobs. So because we can't appeal to them, we need a strategy to strangle the tar sands from the outside. We need to cut off the arteries that are fueling this monstrosity. First and foremost, the Keystone XL pipeline, which will never be built if we have anything to say about it. We know that we can do better, that we do not have to attack our Earth with ever greater violence in order to live happily and fulfilled. We know that there are energy sources based on renewing and amplifying life, not sucking it dry. Let us labor with all our hearts for this new day.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Naomi Klein, for that introduction to our discussion this afternoon. I'm Sari Saranen. I'm the National Health and Safety Environment Director for Union4. Union4 is the largest private sector union in Canada. We are the offspring of two parents, the Canadian Auto Workers and the Communication Energy Paper Workers, who married and produced Union4 in 2013. So we're still a young offspring, lots on our plate. We have about 305,000 members across Canada, and they certainly represent all of the economic sectors, including the energy sector and transportation sector. So I have the great pleasure this afternoon of facilitating a friendly discussion between two of my sister and brother here. I have Mireille Pelletier as well as Donald Lafleur. Donald is from the Canadian Labour Congress. He's the Executive Vice President. And Sister Mireille is an advisor to the Quebec version of the Canadian or the Quebec Labour Congress. And so our discussion this afternoon is going to be centering on this power shift that's happening in Canada. Very exciting to see that happening. And that power shift is a political power shift. As I've been listening throughout this morning and this afternoon as well, is that Labour can certainly influence a lot. We're the citizens of our countries, of our lands. Yet somehow there's a disconnect between the political parties that then come into power and how they serve. I'm not elected, but I serve the elected membership. So I get up every morning and go, how may I serve? How may I serve? I don't see politicians doing that. I'm going to start calling my MP and MPP and saying, how are you serving me today? And that's how I think all of us certainly look at our roles in our unions, as well as our parties or our homes that we come to represent here. And I want to share a bit of a story before I get to the panel. And we had an earlier discussion, so I'm going to put a caveat on the table, an earlier discussion of how we're going to help the rest of the group here by condensing our discussion, because I know there's still lots going on, and it's about think the time is right, but I see is at 10 after 2. So there's still lots going on this afternoon. So I wanted to just really give you a brief update on what happened in Alberta. And Alberta is one of our provinces out in the west, oil sands, not Texas tea, but certainly Alberta tea, black gold. And there was an election that was called very quickly, beginning of the year, by a new premier that was there, and it was a ruling party, the Conservative Party, ultra-conservative party. They've been in power for decades, and they were just the establishment. Nobody thought that any change could happen. And here comes Rachel Notley and the Notley crew. And Rachel is the elected leader of the New Democratic Party. Had no chance at all, as a pundit would say, and the media would say, no hope in hell at all of making any significant contribution. But you can never say never as you start looking at the economic factors that were happening. So you had all of the moons and the stars and the planets aligning in favor of Rachel and her Notley crew. And you had oil prices that started plummeting. There was uncertainty in the oil fields. You started looking at the rhetoric of the existing government in place who would start to say, look at yourself in the mirror. You have not done anything to contribute to the well-being of this government or this province. And we often look at Alberta and Norway, oil-rich country as well, of how Norway has secured its royalties, its riches from the oil to look after its societal relations and its citizens. Alberta hadn't done that. They certainly had set up a fund that would look after its citizens, but that fund had been reduced to next to nothing. And so when times are tough, that's what that fund was about, is to look after its citizens. Well, the fund's not depleted, but there was hardly anything left in that fund. So the premier of the province at the time said, well, you citizens have been having a great old time looking at this fund or not looking after the fund, so no, you have to pay the price. No one else but the citizens. That didn't resonate very well with hardworking Albertans. So there's a movement that started to rise from that, and certainly Labour played a huge role in that, knocking on doors, asking people for their support. And on Cinco de Mayo, on May 5th, when the elections were held, Rachel Notley was elected. There was a rippling effect that happened in the oil sands. They probably started or slowed down any of gushes that were coming out of the earth, depleted that for a mere second, and there was real questioning of what will this mean? What will this mean to the oil producers? What will this mean to the citizens in Alberta? And it's only since May 5th, but certainly Premier Notley has been looking at how does she involve the union movement, the labor movement, but also looking at collaboratively working with all the stakeholders. And she's been talking about the royalties. That was one of her platforms, of the royalties that come out of these oil companies, looking at a higher carbon levies, phasing out coal-fired power, having greater interprovincial collaboration with Ontario and Quebec, who recently signed an agreement with their partner in California on cap and trade, and also looking at how do we resurrect this province and looking after all of its citizens, including the First Nations. So I'm going to stop there, and Danelle, are you the first speaker? So I'm going to be timing you, Danelle, 15 minutes, starting now.
In the Canadian Labour movement, Sari and I, for example, have sat on the Environment Committee of the Canadian Labour Congress for years. Andrea Pearth is the national rep. You might have seen her. She's come to these meetings in the past. We've pressured governments, corporations, through consultation, through negotiations. I could tell you, for example, coming from the postal sector, that last round of negotiations, we put language in our collective agreement forcing Canada Post to look at greening their operations under Appendix C, which is a job creation clause in the collective agreement. We've been to Cochabamba, Durban, Trois-Rivières. That was the QFL, the Quebec Federation of Labour, having an environment conference years ago. And I'd like to mention extended producer liability because that comes from the auto sector in Canada, and Brother Nick DiCarlo, who's now a retiree, talking about forcing the big three, Chrysler, Ford, and GM, to take back their cars when the consumers are done with them. And imagine applying that reality to many other industries as well. So we were in New York with 400,000 people. Our president, Hassan Youssef, spoke at that rally to the labor contingent. You may recall, if you were there, there was a stage there set up for that. We marched in Quebec City, and Sister Mireille is going to talk a bit about that. In March, April, we had 25,000 people in the streets, including the Canadian Labour Congress, Canadian Union of Public Employees, the Amalgamated Transit Union, United Steelworkers, Public Service Alliance of Canada, the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, and the Quebec Federation of Labour and the CSN were major players in organizing that. And I want to also recognize that Sean came up to Quebec, the Green Economy Network, as well as Adapting Canadian Workplaces, Carla Lipsig-Mume, who did presentations. And we're planning a big march in Toronto on July 5th. For anybody that can make it, that would be great. We're hoping to get as many, if not more, people there. So the next slide here shows, if you look at the agenda, you can see, we talk about students and First Nations. This is Durban, South Africa. We had a delegation there. Those are the students. They're wearing jackets with the names of multinational corporations on their jackets. They were giving out samples of what was supposed to be tar sands examples with a little note on them. So we were helping them out. We put those stickers when the minister responsible for the environment in Canada arrived in Durban. We stickered his hotel with these stickers, anti-tar sands. And this is a First Nations chief in the bottom here, where the students had painted the Canadian flag with oil dripping off it, talking with the media. This is part of the march that we participated in Durban. So building alliances, I'll walk through this quite quickly. Adapting Canadian Workplaces with Sister Carla Lipsig-Mume. She, like Sean, has organized. She's gotten grants. We've done surveys around the world. For example, as postal workers, we did a survey of 140 countries. What are postal unions doing on the environmental front, both with the employer and within their own organizations, using what we had done as the Canadian Union of Postal Workers as an example. So we asked questions, and we got replies from 40-some countries, and we're still doing the analysis of that. Okay. Green Economy Network with Tony Clark. Three main objectives or priorities: renewable energy development strategy, green homes and green buildings, a national public transportation strategy. And we have been doing roundtables across the country lately with this organization or group. And we're involved with these groups. The Council of Canadians, Andrea Harden. It's an ad hoc committee putting pressure on the government to do the right thing as it relates to the environment. And you may know Maud Barlow is the head of this organization, very strong activist for many years. And Trade Unions for Energy Democracy. I don't think I have to explain that here, but we often talk about the great work that's being done here when we do presentations in different forums. And I want to just take this opportunity to congratulate and thank the unions that are mentioned here for the work and the resistance they've been doing to the pipelines. You heard the video from Naomi Klein talking about the pipelines. When she talks about the tentacles and cutting those off, that's what she means. And I want to personally thank SEIU, BJ32, because they've hosted these things for last year in New York. We had meetings here, both breakfast meetings, evening meetings. I just want to take this opportunity to thank this great union for what they've done for us. On an international scale, so the Canadian Labour Congress has participated in these COPs. I talked about Durban earlier. We weren't in Lima, but we work with Annabella, and we're hoping to actually send a delegation to Paris, COP 21. We've already, our President Hassan has sent a letter to the Prime Minister of Canada on March 27th of this year, putting pressure on that government. That letter is available on the website of the Canadian Labour Congress. Public-private, I mean, I've been very impressed with what this organization, Trade Unions for Energy Democracy, is all about. And it fits right into much of what I personally believe in as far as, you know, privatization and how that drives the agenda for the ruling class. And just the name, you know, democratic, Trade Unions for Energy Democracy, I think fundamentally that's what we need to talk about. Because we talk about the impact on workers, we talk about, you know, the services going down, the money going to the private sector, but the reality is our democracies, our fragile democracies, are being dismantled through privatization. When the government gives you a service, you don't like the service, you throw them out. It's not perfect, but when it's the private sector, they are democratically responsible to no one, because I've never seen a CEO's name on a ballot at the election time. Alberta, I'll skip this part, because you did a great job, Sari. I will just say that what Sari talked about, and even putting together a commission on looking at the royalties going to the people of Alberta, is what this government ran on, including taxing the rich. That's what she ran on, and she got a majority government based on that reality. Hopefully she'll stay the course and get re-elected in Alberta. Ontario, what we have now is we managed to avoid getting Hudat Conservatives elected, and he was running on right-to-work legislation, bringing that into Ontario. So we weren't successful in getting the NDP elected, but the Liberals who are in power are now talking about privatizing hydro, which flies in the face of everything Trade Unions for Energy Democracy is fighting for. So they're starting with 15%, they're talking about as high as 60% of Ontario hydro. Completely unacceptable under the guise that they want to save money and there's a debt. The reality is this brings in millions, if not billions of dollars into the taxpayers' coffers, if you will, and it's not a good idea to privatize something that makes that much money, or makes money at all. The priorities, I've talked about Ontario. The election is coming October 19th. We get involved at all three levels of elections. The four main topics that we've taken to the election, including advertisings on TV, are good jobs, including green jobs, retirement security, which is a topic and an issue the CLC has been fighting for over 5 years now, childcare and healthcare. We've done round tables across the country in 17 locations, and we're on our second round. We've talked to well over 4,000 people now. It was 3,000 at the time. And the objective is to get union membership, knocking on doors, trying to get the New Democratic Party elected at the federal level, as we have done in Alberta. So the NDP is running on a strong platform that's got these issues, or a lot of these issues included. $15 an hour minimum wage federal level, that's part of their platform. $15 a day childcare across the country. And you may know that Harper had put the retirement age from 65 to 67. He was out of the country when he announced that, by the way. And the New Democrats are talking about rolling that back to 65 and improving the Canada Pension Plan as well. I want to say also that the polls are showing, you know, although it's not, you don't find it here except for the green jobs, that Canadians are very concerned about the environment and protecting the Canadian environment. It scores very high as it relates to election issues when they're asked the question. So, if you want more information, you've got the websites. I can get you that information. Come and see me. But these are, you know, many of the organizations I've talked about, whom we work with, including the Canadian Labour Congress itself, Quebec Federation of Labour. I often finish my environmental presentations with this slide. You may have seen it. It's a Cree prophecy. Only after the last tree has been cut down, only after the last river has been poisoned, only after the last fish has been caught, only then will you find that money cannot be eaten. Thank you very much. We'll open it up for questions after.
Very impressive. Thank you so much. Within the 15 minutes. All right, you can catch your breath right now. Mireille, are you going to do it by yourself? We'll kick in, but... And we have Marie-Christine Naillot, who's joining us on the stage as an impromptu interpreter. Thank you very much.
Donc, je recommence. Donc, la CSN est présente au Québec et on représente 325 000 travailleuses et travailleurs.
So the National Confederation of Unions, CSN of Quebec, represents approximately 325,000 workers.
Presque 100% de l'énergie produite au Québec est renouvelable. On produit 96% de notre énergie par l'hydroélectricité.
So to start with, to say that nearly 100% of the energy that is produced in Quebec is actually renewable, in the sense that 96% of it comes from hydroelectricity. Is that how you say it in English? Yeah.
Donc, pour diminuer nos GES, on a toujours cru qu'il allait seulement falloir diminuer ce qui provient de la consommation. 44% des GES au Québec sont produits par le transport des individus et des marchandises.
So in Quebec, we need to reduce carbon dioxide emission, is that right? Because transport actually represents 44% of those emissions. So we feel that it is through transport that we will reduce our emissions.
Par contre, la situation risque de changer avec l'avènement de ce que je pourrais appeler des énergies provenant du schiste.
But the situation might actually change with the gradual taking over of some energy sources which come from shale gas.
On a découvert il y a environ 5 ans du gaz de schiste sous les plus belles terres agricoles du Québec.
Approximately 5 years ago, we found that there was some shale gas deposits under some of the best arable land in our country.
Sean en a parlé ce matin, mais il y a eu en 2013, au mois de juillet, 47 morts par l'explosion de wagons contenant du pétrole de schiste.
Sean mentioned it this morning, but in July 2013, some 47 people died because of the explosion of some shale gas trains, wagons. Thank you.
Depuis 2 ans, il y a environ 9 fois plus de wagons transportant du pétrole qui se promènent sur le territoire du Québec.
And over the last couple of years, the amount of trains actually going around the country and carrying oil has increased twofold.
Il y a également 2 projets importants de pipeline. Un qui est de la compagnie Enbridge et un qui est de la compagnie TransCanada qui s'appelle Énergie Est. Il faut savoir que le pipeline d'Énergie Est est plus gros encore que Keystone XL.
And we are also concerned about the fact that they are literally in the pipelines. 2 pipelines are being actually planned for in Quebec, which one of them by the Enbridge company and the other one by a company called Energy East. And that particular pipeline, the one by Energy East, would be even bigger than the Exxon? Keystone XL, whatever, pipeline.
Il y a également, on s'est toujours fait dire au Québec qu'il n'y avait pas de pétrole présent. Mais maintenant, avec l'avènement du pétrole de schiste, il y aurait du pétrole sur une île qui s'appelle l'île d'Anticosti. Et il y aurait aussi du pétrole sous le golfe du Saint-Laurent. Ce n'est pas des réserves prouvées, par contre. Mais c'est dans les positions du gouvernement de développer ces plans de pétrole-là pour faire ce qu'il qualifie d'argent facile à faire.
No. We always thought that there was no oil in Quebec, but now with the discovery, or at least potential discovery, of such oil within the Gulf of the St. Lawrence and the other one under an island, whatever island.
Anticosti Island.
Do excuse me. It seems that the government is actually wanting to explore that further in order to make easy, quick money.
Tout ce que je viens de parler a amené un soulèvement de la société civile. Donc, les étudiants, les Premières Nations, les syndicats, les groupes environnementaux et autres groupes se sont regroupés pour faire des manifestations et pour dire au gouvernement qu'on ne voulait pas de l'exploration ou de l'exploitation des énergies sales, ou qu'on ne voulait tout simplement pas devenir une autoroute pour le passage des sables bitumineux de l'Alberta.
Tar sand. So that gradually led the population to a greater awareness and up to various uprisings, if we can call them like that, which involved, first of all, students, First Nation people, but the unions also were involved, as well as civil society and the NGO movement. And they came together in mobilizations and demonstrations to say to the federal government that they did not want the exploitation of dirty energy sources on their soil, and that they did not want the territory to become a motorway for the transportation of tar sand.
On voit ici une photo, c'est un forum qui a eu lieu il y a environ 1 an. C'est pour faire le décloisonnement de la société au Canada, pour qu'on se parle ensemble, pour trouver des alternatives pour battre ces énergies sales. Et vous voyez qu'il y a des difficultés de discussion au Canada. Juste le fait qu'il y ait des francophones et des anglophones est un fait qui suscite à lui-même la difficulté de se rejoindre tout le monde au pays.
So 1 year ago was launched the idea of a forum, and you've got the picture up on the wall. Yeah, the picture up on the wall, a people's social forum. The idea being trying to break down the walls that exist between various sectors of society in the country. And find alternatives to these dirty energy sources. Obviously, one of the main difficulties in that is the fact that they are two different communities. There is an English-speaking community and a French-speaking community in Canada, and quite often the twine don't meet.
Ici sur la photo, une manifestation qui a eu lieu à Québec, où on retrouve sur la ligne de départ divers acteurs de la société civile réunis ensemble pour une cause commune qui était, dans ce cas-ci, les sables bitumineux.
And the picture you've got on the screen right now actually is the beginning of a demonstration that took place a while ago, and that was actually a success in the sense that it brought together very many sectors in society around the same slogan, i.e. no to tar sand.
C'est à la même manifestation, on a fait un thermomètre humain pour montrer que le climat est important.
And at the same demonstration, they actually made up with people a human thermometer just to show how important the climate was.
Avec ce soulèvement de la société civile et ce regroupement qu'on voit au Québec, on peut dire qu'on a eu quelques victoires. Je vais seulement en nommer deux. Premièrement, le projet des gaz de schiste au Québec est présentement en arrêt, je pourrais dire complet. Et deuxièmement, la compagnie TransCanada voulait faire un port pétrolier dans le fleuve Saint-Laurent, un endroit qui est la pouponnière des belugas. Et ce projet-là a été stoppé car, à cause de la pression populaire.
And I think that because of popular pressure, we've actually gained some victories. I will just mention two. And the first one is that the exploitation of shale gas has stopped more or less completely, I can say. And the second one is that the TransCanada corporation, which wanted to actually build an oil port, whereabouts? Oh, c'est où?
Dans le fleuve Saint-Laurent.
Along the St. Lawrence River. They wanted to build an oil port, and that was stopped because it was an area where beluga fish, beluga producing fish, yes, were actually bred. Sorry? The whales. Oh, are they?
Ouais.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Whales. Okay.
Donc, un des rôles des syndicats, on peut se demander comment on va faire pour influencer le débat public et comment faire passer nos idées.
So, what is the role of unions, and how are we going to work and act in order to put our ideas across?
À la CSN, on a présentement deux campagnes. La première, c'est pour sortir le gouvernement Harper aux prochaines élections.
Within the CSN, the National Confederation of Unions, we have two ongoing campaigns. The first one is to get rid of Harper and its government at the next general elections.
Je vais vous dire 4 ou 5 points de son histoire d'horreur en environnement, de ce super gouvernement.
I can give you sort of 4 or 5 horror stories with regards to the environment and what Harper's done over the last years.
À chaque année, il donne 1,4 milliard de subventions aux compagnies pétrolières. Son seul but, c'est de désenclaver les sables bitumineux. 300 des 775 scientifiques d'Environnement Canada ont été mis à pied. Il a massacré à peu près toutes les lois environnementales qui existaient au pays et il a retiré le Canada du protocole de Kyoto.
Sort of 5 points then, very briefly. First of all, the Harper government has been giving to the oil industry some $1.4 billion in subsidies every year. At the moment, tar sand is very much concentrated in an area, and they're locked in that particular area. C'est dans l'Alberta, c'est ça? In the Alberta area, they're locked in, landlocked. So the purpose of the Harper government is to try and find a way to open the locks, the natural locks that exist, so that those tar sands can actually be quote-unquote exported further afield on the Canadian territory. Thirdly, 300 out of the 775 environmental specialist experts within that existed, I mean, they still exist in Canada, but nonetheless, 300 of them have been laid off. The government has done away with all the laws that dealt with the environment. All of them have come away. And finally, it's taken Canada out of the Kyoto Protocol.
Pour faire rapidement, on a aussi une campagne au Québec qu'on appelle la campagne d'austérité. Il faut comprendre que le pétrole est vu par certains politiciens comme de l'argent facile. Donc, ils font tout ce qui est en leur pouvoir pour dire qu'on serait fou de ne pas exploiter nos hydrocarbures et de se priver de cet argent-là quand la province manque d'argent. C'est ce que le gouvernement veut faire croire à la population.
There is also a campaign which we are working on, which deals with austerity issues, and many politicians are trying to put forward the argument that oil is easy money for Quebec, and that Quebec would be totally mad not to actually exploit all its resources in oil, because it is indeed easy money to make.
À la CSN, on revendique qu'il y a d'autres secteurs que les hydrocarbures et ces énergies pour créer de l'emploi. Et on veut une transition vers des emplois verts et une diminution de notre utilisation de l'énergie fossile. Et pour nous, les 3 priorités pour la CSN, c'est la création d'emplois en efficacité énergétique, dans l'électrification des transports et dans le secteur de la construction.
But the CSN actually puts forward different demands in its campaigns, saying that there are other possible sources of energy, that we must move towards greener sources of energy and foster job creations. And there are 3 aspects which we insist on: greener jobs and less recourse to fossil fuels. And there are 3 sectors that 3 aspects which we insist upon, and that is energy efficiency must be fought for, as well as electrification of transport, as well as better construction facilities.
En terminant, pour la CSN et pour que la transition soit équitable, on croit, puis je crois que ça va être à peu près partout pareil, qu'il faut l'implication des travailleurs, que les gouvernements ne doivent pas les laisser de côté. Il faut revendiquer de la formation continue parce qu'il va y avoir une transition à effectuer. Il faut prendre l'offensive en environnement comme on a pris l'offensive dans les lois de santé et sécurité du travail. Puis tout ça afin d'éviter que les travailleurs soient mis à l'écart, comme c'est trop souvent le cas.
We feel that workers and their organizations are a pivotal point in fair, just transition. And for that, we feel that indeed workers must be fully involved in the decisions that will be taken in the future. We feel that there is a need for lifelong training or occupational training in the transition period. We also feel that we must be more on the offensive, on the attack, as we have done in the past on health and safety at work. All that because we do not want that ultimately workers are set aside, and as has been too often the case with various struggles in the past.
Thank you very much for that excellent translation. You've had now a whirlwind tour of Canada, as well as its challenges and some of the excitement that's going on with the federal election coming up in October. So I hope you stay tuned for our election marches as we move forward. Lots is happening with the Pan Am Games that are starting on July 10th in Toronto. And lots is being planned from the labor movement as well as the NGOs and other allies on how to utilize that opportunity to raise issues on the environment. All right, so we'll start with questions.
Thanks. My name's Luke Gordon. I'm with the United Steelworkers, and I'd like to say welcome. a lot of what we're looking at that went on in Lake Macquarie and elsewhere in Canada, we're seeing here in the United States. It's not crude from Alberta, it's the Bakken Shale, and it's being transshipped throughout the United States in black rail cars. A lot of it's coming down the west side of the Hudson, just miles from here. And it's an accident waiting to happen. And what we're faced with in the steelworkers is jobs versus the economy versus death versus the economy. We've lost 3 refineries here in the Northeast in the past 3 years. We're trying to find things that we can bring in terms of a just transition to those workers. What came along was liquefied natural gas, which is possibly making matters worse. So I'm just reaching out to my friends in Union4. What have you done in terms of, first off, educating your own membership and getting the message out in terms of just transition? And have you had any successes?
Eddie Rosario from the New York City chapter of the Labor Council for Latin American Advancement. I was wondering if either one of you could please speak about the attacks against the national healthcare system in Canada in context of the climate crisis and health.
Somebody at the back?
I'm Teresa Turner from Canada, from the Athabasca tar sands and the International Oil Working Group. And I'd like to ask, what kind of transition are we talking about? Are we talking about a capitalist transition where we have more solar? Or are we talking about a transition to a solar era that transcends, that moves beyond a capitalist era?
Anytime you have a just transition, we had that same debate with the asbestos mines in Quebec. It was a divisive discussion that we had in the labor movement in Canada about jobs versus the health effects. Same thing is happening with the oil sands, of looking at what is that just transition. So as an organization, we've looked at how do we, first of all, define transition. And I think the sister from the tar sands, the Athabasca tar sands, asked about that transition, is what does transition mean? What does that mean? Does that mean that one day you turn the lights off and the next day you turn the lights on and it's a new world? It doesn't happen that way. We have members that have been working in the oil sands for the last 30, 35 years. There's second generation workers there. So we need to look at how do we, what's the evolution, the next set of jobs that come out or that are created in the oil sands. And that's one that we can't do alone. You can't always do that at the bargaining table. You need to have that discussion with the government as well. And now we have a government in place in Alberta who will actually have a discussion with the stakeholders and not just have one-way discussion with the oil executives. So what we've had with our members over the years is we've certainly had lots of debates on what does the energy mean, what does fossil fuel mean, what does it mean to the environment that you're in. You also have to understand many of the workers that are in the oil sands do not live there. They come from the East Coast, who were devastated by cod fisheries that dried up because of mismanagement. There was no policy on fisheries. So they're transient workers. They come there, they do a 7-day shift, and then they go back home for 7 days and come back. But that doesn't mean that you don't have any kind of connection to that community you live in. Certainly Fort McMurray has thrived into a community that is looking after its members, and the First Nations communities are there. There are health effects that have arisen, but then you have the powers of being that say, well, that's not really related to the oil sands. We've done lots to work at that. So it has been a very thought out transition of having those discussions on the health effects side, on the economic side, because as we heard from other panelists as well, we have this economic blackmail as workers we're continuously under. So what we've been advocating is certainly developing that energy strategy that Canada as a whole needs to have. And that needs to take into account where is the energy coming from, how are we energizing. You need energy to survive. That's how our economies have been built. You have economic viability that you have, and also you have the environment that you need to take into account. We heard from someone else who say, and certainly is very true, is there are no good jobs on a dead planet. So how are we ensuring that? And it hasn't been an easy discussion that we've had with our members. That's how they survive. That's how they put food on their table, ensure their children are looked after, and they have a roof over their heads. But as workers, we're not the problem. The problem is more about the policies and the structures that are put into place by the employers. And that's where we need to have the further discussions with the employers. But it's always at the bargaining table. So when you have environment and then you have economic well-being at the bargaining table, who survives at the bargaining table? Oftentimes you have environment that's sort of at the side of the table, and it drops off oftentimes. So what we've done is we've created pools of what we call penny funds for education purposes. The employer puts X number of pennies per workers per hour into a fund, paid education leave, and we have an education program that not only takes into account occupational health and safety, but also the environment in your workplace, the environment in your community. And not in the energy sector, but in some of the other transportation sector, especially the auto sector, we've been able to bargain joint environment committees into workplaces where you have, same as health and safety joint committees, you have equal representation from the employer and from the union, elected position or appointed positions. And you deal with your footprint within the plant as well as in the community, because emissions don't stop in the four walls of the plant, they go into the community, and you're a member of the community as well. So it's that education awareness building that you need to start from. It doesn't happen overnight. It is a slow progress. And over time, your members become educated, and they make the decisions at the ballot boxes of what kind of government you want to have in place and who you will have those further discussions with. I hope that answered some of your question. I don't have that magic baton. I wish I did, otherwise I would have been sitting here. We had also a question on healthcare systems and the climate change. Donald?
I've got a bit to say about the three questions. Just on the United Steelworkers, brother, I was at a conference here in New York 7-8 years ago of researchers. And I went to a workshop that was being put on by Exxon workers. And they, at one point, they put up the map of the world, and they knew, because you talked about 3 refineries getting closed, they knew which refineries in the United States were going to be closed in the future, and they knew where they were going to open refineries in Russia and in countries where labor is cheaper. Free trade agreements allow that. It's the same thing that's happening in other sectors, but just to show you that this has been thought out, and that I've seen it. You know, it was presented to us that long ago in this city. Now, as far as the education, I want to congratulate Sari's union. Before the merger, she talked about the merger earlier. CEP took strong positions on
It wasn't
Kyoto.
a merger.
Hey?
It was a birthing.
Okay, the birthing, sorry. I'm obviously not from that union. So the CEP had endorsed Kyoto and done everything that Sari talked about, educated their members, had a vote at the National Convention to make sure that the majority of members were on site, despite the fact that they represent workers in those sectors. Incredible, just incredible stuff. The president, she talked about Fort McMurray. The president of Fort McMurray, Brother LeBlanc, was with us in Durban. I showed you we were in Durban with a delegation. When we met with the Canadian negotiator or the rep, not a politician, but one of the reps in Durban, he was with us. And he put him on the spot and told him, the unions suggested this, and this union suggested that, and this is going too fast, and we should slow down, and here's how we do it more environmentally friendly. But on deaf ears, right? So just again, very strong positions, very strong activists. And they've taken, since their Union4, they've taken very strong positions on pipelines, no to Keystone, no to going through the Rockies. And if we have to go down that road, because as Sari was saying, there's energy needs, what's the plan on renewables? And they're pushing that agenda very hard as a union. On the attacks on the healthcare system, what the Conservatives have passed now is cutting $36 billion out of the system starting next year. So if they're re-elected, that's what they want to do. And they've been going down that path. Canada has been spending more money on the private side of Medicare than on the public side for well over a decade. Every year it's more money going to the private sector. So they are slowly but surely moving in that direction, even though we still have a very good healthcare system. They understaff. You know, the unions representing those workers talk about it all the time, as we see in other sectors. And they do that for two reasons. Of course, they want to privatize and try and convince the public that the service is so bad that it needs to be privatized. But also, as the workers are having to work, 12, 16 hours a day, they have to take on more people in the hospitals and things like that. Well, that leaves no time to be a shop steward, and it leaves no time to fight for the environment, and it leaves no time to fight for anything else, because you're working 16 hours a day and 6-7 days a week, as is happening in other sectors. So it's basically starved the system to justify privatization. On the transition, the question about solar, I could tell you that the march in Toronto, the slogan is justice, jobs, climate change. And I think one of the reasons we're here is to make sure and try and avoid staying in the same situation we are today. So in other words, if the solar or wind or any other energy of the future is in the hands of Exxon, we're going to be in the same boat we are today in time. The answer to your question is we have to have it in public hands, public ownership, not in the private sector, or else we're going to be in the same boat we are today, I think is one of the key answers.
Mireille, des mots de toi?
Juste pour terminer, même si au Québec, présentement, on produit déjà en énergie renouvelable, nos positions est de faire qu'il y ait plus d'énergie éolienne et plus d'énergie provenant de la biomasse. Donc, pour diversifier notre production d'énergie renouvelable, et on ne veut absolument pas diversifier notre production d'énergie en allant vers le pétrole de schiste ou le gaz de schiste. L'important, c'est de diversifier, mais en restant dans le renouvelable.
Just to finish on that note, if we are going to go into more diversified energy sources in Canada and in Quebec, we need to move forward towards more wind and biomass energy sources. And as CSN, as National Confederation of Unions, we certainly do not want to go towards more oil, shale oil or shale gas energy sources.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for giving us this opportunity. It's really important for us, before everybody heads out, for us to have these discussions. Mark my words, the governments are talking, the enterprises, employers out there, they're continuously talking. So we need to take advantage of all these opportunities that we have as labor movement to come together and have our discussions, to have our united front, our offensive front. And certainly in Paris, that gives us further opportunity to ensure that, yes, it is time out for many of those governments out there, but it's certainly never time out for us. We need to continuously work at ensuring the next generation has a viable future ahead of us, a clean, viable future ahead of us. Thanks very much.